How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Moradiega, live today on July the 5th, or actually not live, but coming to you guys today on July the 5th, the day after 4th of July. Hopefully you guys are watching this, enjoying your weekend with this show. But on that note, we're going to start off today's show talking some more about the NFC. All the excitement is in the NFC, honestly, now that I think about it. A lot more things going on there than the AFC. With, again, talking about the Hard Knocks episode that debuted on Tuesday, we're going to look more into what was said about Saquon and how he ended up in Philadelphia. Then the debate about the Cowboys quarterback, with them deciding to pay Dak Prescott, or maybe how Trey is affecting them taking so long to negotiate with Dak, and also taking a look at what Drake London said we can expect from the Falcons offense in 2024, plus a lot more on today's show. So if you guys would, before we start, if you have any questions or comments you ever want to make on this show, you use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, whenever you guys are watching the show, I'm able to see your question pop up. I'll read it in the chat box, and that way I'll acknowledge it, read it on air, and have more of a conversation on shows like this. So it's a massive help for the network and this show. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. But with that being said, we'll start with the first segment. More on Hard Knocks. What did we see on Tuesday? And just as you guys can read it there, what were the Giants thinking? In the first episode, like we mentioned on Tuesday, we talked about how they got to the decision of Daniel Jones, making sure that this was his year, that it was a big year for Daniel Jones, and this year was going to be the year to prove it. Was it fair? What did they say about that in regards to Saquon? That was yesterday. We really didn't touch on how the heck Saquon Barkley ended up on the Philadelphia Eagles, and now we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Like I mentioned, debuted on Tuesday, and one of the main things right away that you took away from it was this whole Saquon situation, and there was one scene in particular that has been going all over social media where you have general manager JioSaavn in a conference room in his office, maybe talking with some other coaches, assistant coaches, other personnel around his circle, talking about Saquon and what they're going to do with him. Are they going to franchise tag him? Are they going to just let him hit free agency? What were they thinking around it? And one of the assistant general managers, Brandon Brown, he brought up a good point around the running back market and just an overall view of it. He said certain positions have high dollar points because they're positions that make an impact. You want to make sure you get the return on your investment. Basically highlighting what we've been saying about the running back market all along. They're a little bit weary about it just because, like he said there in the last statement, you want to make sure you get the best return for your investment. The fear around the running backs, obviously now, similar to Todd Gurley, he suffers with a severe knee injury, and then you paid him all that money at 26, 27 years old, and with them being injured, they're not the same player. Now it looks like a waste, and people are questioning you for making that deal in the first place. So teams are a lot more nervous about that now, and it started with Todd Gurley, and assistant general manager Brandon Brown brought up that point. And then you get into a back and forth a little bit with JioSaavn talking with, I couldn't find the name, one of the assistants, one of the coaches that he had right there to his side. I'm sure you guys can see it when you guys pull up the full clip, but it was a little conversation that they had, and it went sort of like this. General manager JioSaavn brought up the point, is it realistic, unrealistic to tag Saquon Barkley again and trade him? They came up to the point where they said it was probably not going to happen. Then the assistant general manager or the other coach said, are we positive no one will pay him that amount of money in free agency? Then JioSaavn responded with, who would sign a running back for that dollar amount? Basically, wiping that away. There's no way anybody would sign Saquon Barkley, a running back, for $12 million per year. Again, the same assistant said any team with money to spend would probably try and sign Saquon in free agency. JioSaavn again said there's a lot of running backs in free agency, almost saying, why would they just focus on Saquon, the most expensive option, which is true. He did make a good point, but again, that general manager responded with, are there any other difference makers in free agency? And you look at some of the running backs, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, Joe Mixon, I guess a little bit, but he was traded, if I'm not mistaken. So There are, really Derrick Henry is the main difference maker, in my opinion, that would compare to Saquon. But Joe Shane made a good point. There's a lot of running backs in free agency. Why would you want to spend so much money on Saquon? But that's not the craziest thing about it. Honestly, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. The fact that Joe Shane said who would sign a running back for that amount applies to 95% of running backs except Christian McCaffrey, Saquon. Maybe that's it off the top of my head. Maybe those two guys are the only two guys, and maybe Bijan Robinson with the potential that he has. But regardless of that, that statement applies to, again, like I said, almost all running backs except the handful that I just mentioned. So that's where I'm confused, and that's where, this title comes from. What were the Giants thinking? It's almost like if you guys have ever seen that trend on social media where the parents have their kids there, they put a cookie or some sort of dessert in front of them and say, oh, don't eat it until I come back. The kid eats it every time, because how could you not? How could you not expect Saquon Barkley to be on the open market, to run that risk in the first place and think, oh, no one's going to pay him. No one's going to pay that amount. He's way too expensive. At 27 years old, mind you, and no one's going to even look at him. He's way too expensive. Why would we even worry about that? It's crazy. It's crazy to think about, because Saquon, for how right and logical that point is, Saquon, I think, just exceeds that, mindset, that limitation that a lot of teams have. And it goes back to the point of why the Giants, I feel, should have exceeded their own limitations, thinking that no one's going to pay him. Why should we pay him that amount of money? He is one of the few generational talented running backs that we've seen over the last few years. Could you imagine if Saquon wasn't on the Giants the last few years? Where would they be in terms of just any sort of success relative to how they've played outside of him? To say and feel safe about putting him on the free agent market and not considering anything else, he was the face of the entire Giants team for this period since he was drafted up until now. They franchise tag him. They did everything to keep him, but then when it came to the moment of deciding to pay him or not, they decided against it, as if Saquon hasn't done everything to prove himself that he deserves that amount of money, especially for the Giants to pay him that amount of money. I can see other teams maybe being hesitant because, he's really been overworked with the Giants, but the Giants have seen really the behind the scenes of everything and have seen what kind of person he is, how dedicated he is to the team. For them not to offer him anything and just let him walk and think he's going to come crawling back or something is nuts. This conversation is almost another example of how, I don't want to say how poorly it's been managed, because Joe Shane really hasn't been there too long, but it's just another misstep in these decision-making processes that I'm not a big fan of, and it just blows my mind of how, I know a lot more goes into it with the salary and the finances and just figuring out everything. Maybe if they sign Saquon, they can't afford Brian Burns and his extension. They can't sign other players. But it goes back to that point of giving that contract to Daniel Jones. Once you make that, you really handicap yourself to having limited contracts around Daniel Jones, because players that get that amount of money, those quarterbacks are able to do more with players that don't make that amount of money, if that makes sense. You don't need a top-paid receiver to go along with a top-paid running back if your quarterback is that good. You look at Patrick Mahomes, no one around him is making that sort of money, except maybe Travis Kelce, but I think his went down a little bit. Another player, maybe C.J. Stroud, he's on a rookie deal. Joe Burrow, another one. They're in a period right now where they could pay the quarterback that amount of money because Jamar Chase doesn't have to get paid. You see them not spending money on T. Higgins for that reason. If the quarterback is that good, teams feel confident that they don't need to overspend on these positions to complement their quarterback and make them, that much better, as if they can't do it themselves. The Giants paid Daniel Jones like that, but that isn't the case really with him. And now you look at these two decisions that they've made, almost which one looks worse really just popped up into my head at the time of planning for this segment. Was it a worse decision to pay Daniel Jones that money based on everything that you saw? Or was this a worse decision heading into free agency, thinking no one's going to pay Saquon, no one is going to touch him, no one's going to look at him because he's overly expensive in this day and age in the running back market? When you look at those two scenarios, Daniel Jones' contract was bad. that's really what led into everything. But almost all teams are doing it now. That's the trend. Overspend on the quarterback because you're too afraid to pay a different position because the quarterback is everything, right? I hold it to a high value, but I think teams need to stop this mentality a little bit that any quarterback, if you've seen a glimpse of success from him, let's pay him $40 million. Let's pay him $45 million. That needs to at least be, simmered down a little bit. You get into these situations now where it's handicapped the Giants. They're struggling now to move forward, and they did do a good job of drafting Malik Neighbors, finding other talent around him on the defensive side of the ball, and things like that. But again, if that quarterback position isn't 1,000% sure that that's your guy, and you paid him that amount of money, you're in a weird position now where you're stuck until that contract runs out or until you decide to move on in whichever way you decide to do that. But back on this Saquon thing, that it stems from that Daniel Jones decision, and now to come off of that, it's hard because off of that Daniel Jones' contract, you sort of understand why they want to pay Saquon that amount of money, but they're just stuck between a rock and a hard place there. It's unfortunate that they decided wrong with the Daniel Jones contract at first, and now letting Saquon go, seeing him sign with the Eagles, it's just like the ultimate slap in the face for these wrong decisions that they've made. And this year's going to be big. Like I mentioned last episode, General Manager Joe Schoen said it. This is the year for Daniel Jones. They feel good about it, and they're going to decide if he's their quarterback for the foreseeable future or if they're going to have to move on. And then you start this process over again, and that's less than ideal for a Giants fan, anybody around the Giants that is just waiting to see this team finally make it over the hump, but they just keep stumbling on their way of finally getting over that. So that first episode was super entertaining. I highly recommend you guys watching the Hard Knocks series. I'm definitely going to try and get into it, but that was that. Those were the two biggest quotes from Hard Knocks in the first episode. Let me know what you guys think. Am I being too harsh, or do you guys see it the same way I do? Leave your guys' thoughts in the comment section. But with that being said, we're going to move on to the next segment after our first break, how Dak Prescott's contract extensions are being affected by Trey Lance potentially. Should the Cowboys gamble on Trey Lance now and give up potentially on Dak Prescott? I'll get more into that and my thought process behind all of it after we return. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here now on the show to jump into our second segment, more on the Dallas Cowboys and this scenario that popped up that I saw from the Dallas website with two guys talking about it, the two hosts, and it got me thinking of this hypothetical situation that the Cowboys could find themselves in if worse comes to worse. So a little bit of a context here. Dallas is taking, it seems like, ages to figure out these contract negotiations with Dak Prescott. It random also that if you guys saw the social media post of Dak Prescott walking in a boot, most random thing ever because he's on break right now. And he said, according to some reports that I saw, that it is just typical protocol with his injury going back to 2020. He just does it almost as a precaution. But I saw another thing that he's dealing with a foot sprain now. So debating, reports coming out of it, it's just a crazy thing to see Dak in a boot. Definitely doesn't help his contract negotiations if the Dallas Cowboys see that, if he's in a boot, and how that affects him going into the year. But regardless of that, Dak's going to cost a lot, probably, most likely if he signs a new deal. And now, what could be done about that? If the Cowboys at the end of the day don't decide to re-sign him, don't decide to extend him, what could be an alternative? Well, they have one sitting right there on the bench in Trey Lance, because they did use a 4th-round pick on him, and he still is just there as a glorified backup, and we haven't really seen too much of him since 2022 when he suffered that injury. So the trial is still out on him, really. There's really hardly a trial out on him, because we haven't really seen him in the NFL other than a game and a half or 2 games, whatever it was, before he got injured with the 49ers. And now, this was brought up on the Dallas Cowboys website site. Nick Eatman and Kurt Daniels were talking about it, about this scenario of how Trey Lance could actually affect Dak Prescott's negotiations. And it brought up an interesting point, and one where it kind of diverged me into this thinking process of where these negotiations could go. Nick Eatman was the one that mentioned this quote. He said, "I think they're waiting on a few things regarding Dak, and one of them could be Lance and how he plays. The other is probably Dak and how this season goes for him." He also mentioned that he could see the contract negotiations carrying on into the season, maybe until the end of the season with Dak Prescott. So not the most optimistic view on this situation if you want to get it done before training camp and then move on to CeeDee Lamb's contract negotiations if Dak still remains the priority. But that last part where he said the other is probably Dak and how this season goes for him, but in the same breath he mentioned that one of them could be Trey Lance and how he plays this season. It got me into this scenario, right? You're trying to decide what's best for the Dallas Cowboys going forward. And it's a delicate situation now with Dallas, because you have to see what Trey Lance is. You have to see what he's about, where he's at, how well does he know this offense, how well he has developed personally and as a quarterback just in general. So he's expected to get most of the preseason snaps. There's no way they throw Dak out there because he is a projected starter, obviously. But if you put Trey Lance out there just for the preseason, I don't think that's a good enough sample size to determine anything, because most people don't really realize that they didn't pick up the 5th-year option on Trey Lance, so this is the final year of his contract. You're going to have to make a decision on him going forward. Same thing with Dak. Dak's in the final year of his contract, and you have to decide if you're going to invest $50 million, $55 million, $60 million on Dak going forward just based off of how he plays this year. So now you find yourself in a weird situation where you have only one starting quarterback spot, and you have to try and figure out which quarterback is the one you want to go with going forward. Obviously, it's going to be Dak playing. There's no way, unless a miracle happens or he really does suffer a horrible injury, that Dak is not going to be the starter. So they're going to almost get their wish, and that question is almost answered for them. This season, we're going to see how Dak plays. If they really need some more guarantees, some more facts out there that Dak is really worth this amount of money, we're going to see it this year from Dak, unless, like I said, he gets hurt. But then where does that leave Trey Lance? It's a weird spot, because say you decide to go with Dak. We're going to see where the season goes. If he plays out of his mind again, and maybe they win a playoff game, they get further into the playoffs this year by some, unforeseen circumstance, then we're going to give him $57 million. But again, if you wait and don't extend him and just let him play out the year, the possibility still exists that they could still be priced out of Dak if after the season he decides that I'm still going to test out free agency, this contract's not good enough, I'm going to test out free agency, and then you waited all that time and you still didn't re-sign him. You used up his last year, and now you're left not only without a quarterback, but without really knowing what you have in Trey Lance, because you decided to stick with Dak and see how the season went for him. Now you're really lost on Trey. Are you going to extend Trey Lance based off of the fact that you almost have no other choice unless you go fishing in the free agent market, or think that you're going to draft your next franchise quarterback in next year's draft? But then on the flip side, you're going to flip it now onto Trey Lance. Say, for whatever reason, Trey Lance plays more than the preseason. He plays into the regular season. Now you're trying him out, And it is a risk because it's almost as close as you can get to not really taking the season seriously, if that makes sense, because it's such a huge gamble to throw Trey Lance out there, not having played since 2022. He can play all the preseason, and still I would have my doubts about how he looks at game speed against guys that are actually trying to tackle him to the ground instead of preseason where it's about 60, 70%. So that's a risk in it of itself in having Trey Lance out there if you really want to see how this season goes for him, to have more of a steady mind going forward that if Dak Prescott moves on, we've seen enough out of Trey, we could extend him and do it that way. Very similar situations where you have to decide on what to do for both of these quarterbacks, and I don't know how you do decide. The obvious answer seems to be Dak, but it's not too obvious for me because of the fact that it just comes down to, is this team going to be that much better with Dak as their quarterback? Say Dak wants to stay. Say that Dak wants to be the long-term quarterback here. He says, forget free agency. I want to re-sign with the Cowboys. It comes down to, are the Cowboys still going to be an okay, mediocre team with Dak Prescott now getting paid $50 million? Is that a bigger risk than saying, all right, we're still going to be good. We're not going to be that much better with Dak. Let's just start Trey Lance going forward and start this rebuild officially. Which one is a bigger risk? Starting with Trey, siding with Trey Lance, or paying Dak $50 million and not being that much better anyway? I think that's a legitimate question because it's not so much about Dak and his ability. I just worry that this team right now where they stand with nobody knows where these contract negotiations are going with CeeDee Lamb. The offensive line is a little bit spotty. Outside of CeeDee, do you have that much confidence in Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert to give you some more firepower? Ferguson's good. Jake Ferguson's decent, but we've only really seen that one breakout year from him. Then at running back, is that built up enough where you think you can complement the passing game so much with Ezekiel Elliott back there and the rest of them in a committee? Mike McCarthy's also on his last year, so does that affect anything on this season on how a new head coach comes in? And say the Cowboys pay Dak $50+ million, and the new head coach, if they don't re-sign Mike McCarthy, doesn't really like Dak, and now you have a whole new problem on your hands. So I'm just spitballing here a little bit, but these are all genuine concerns that I have with paying Dak $50 million+ and not having this team be any better, because I think it's just the surrounding cast that needs to improve, not so much the quarterback. That's why if I were to make a decision which is the bigger risk, I would probably say Dak, because the Cowboys are already in a hole with their salary cap. And if you're going to invest so much money into Dak, I know it's the quarterback. I know people want to have a quarterback, a top 10 quarterback, to feel more secure, to give themselves at least of a chance. But it's going back to that same thing. Let's not be so zoned in on the quarterback and having him there, paying him so much money, and this team is not even that much better than when say we started Trey Lance. That's why I almost would rather start Trey Lance and just wipe everything away. Most likely you're going to bring in a new head coach, bring him in, extend Trey Lance. Maybe it is a little bit more likely that you could bring back Trey Lance in free agency, just because I find it hard to believe another team is itching to bring Trey Lance in free agency. As soon as free agency starts, he's on a different team. I don't think the market's like that for him at all. So you could bring in a new coach. I don't think Mike McCarthy's going to stay. Bring him in, see what he thinks about Trey Lance, since you guys already feel comfortable with him, and you decide to extend him, definitely much cheaper. It improves your salary cap, at least in the moment. Dak, unfortunately, moves on. You're going to hate to see it, but you're just going to have to rip the bandage off, I think, at this point, because if you wait on Dak, like Nick Eatman says, and it takes up the whole season, where does that leave CeeDee Lamb? Are you just going to push the contract negotiations back even further with him? He's going to hold out of training camp most likely, so if you just keep pushing it further and further and back, is he going to be there during the regular season? And then he's also in the last year of his contract, so if nothing gets done sooner rather than later, what's the situation going to be with him? Are you going to risk getting closer to free agency to try and re-sign him, or maybe have him hit the market? Hopefully not. Hopefully that's the last resort, but with Dak being the priority, it just pushes everything back here in the last minute, and it's not something that is an ideal situation by any means. It's a tough choice to make, but for me, I think I've seen enough of these gymnastics, jumping with Dak, let's pay him this amount of money, what does CeeDee Lamb get? I think you're just going to have to move on from Dak, and it probably benefits Dak also a lot more. If he hits free agency, has more teams bidding for him, he can earn himself a higher contract. It comes down to the point that I just think this has just run its course with the Cowboys and Dak. Not to say that Dak is done, but just with the pairing of the Cowboys, I think that we've seen it reach its ceiling. So I think it's just time for a fresh start, wipe everything, bring in a new head coach, and stick with Trey Lance, and just figure it out from there. It's going to be tough because everybody is going to be on the Dallas Cowboys and just they're bad this year. Why did they move on from Dak? And you're going to hear everything under the sun about them if they decide to go this way, but I think it is needed. It is a needed step to take with the Dallas Cowboys now where they're not getting that much better with Dak, honestly. With this team, the surrounding cast, in my opinion, got worse, so is it worth spending all that money on him with Micah Parsons' extension coming up and also CeeDee Lamb? It just benefits everybody, in my opinion, where I stand on that point. So that's where I'm feeling. That's where I think the Cowboys should go. It's highly unlikely because of where it is right now. Everybody wants their quarterback there ahead of everything else. So I'll be surprised if they do it, but I really think this is the best solution for them going forward. So as always, let me know what you guys think of this. Which is the bigger risk and what would you guys rather do? Keep Dak and pay him 50 plus or risk it and start all over with Trey Lance? Leave your guys' thoughts in the comments section. And with that being said, we're going to move on with the rest of the show, but we're going to go into a quick break, and when we return, a look at the Atlanta Falcons and what their star wide receiver, Drake London, said that he expects out of this team and what have they been really emphasizing throughout this offseason to get to the potential that everybody knows that they can get to in 2024. Stick around and find out what he said on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping right back into the action on today's show, how about elsewhere in the sports world? If you were watching this on July 5th, how about that Spain and Germany game in the Euros? That was an awesome game over here where I had the chance to watch it. It was a crazy game. If you guys watched it live or anything, highly recommend checking out the Euros. They've been crazy. But back to NFL football, back to the topic on hand. The Atlanta Falcons, talking about their potential. It seems that's all we've been talking about for the longest time with the Falcons. What can they be? How far can they reach with this team? If only they had a quarterback to take advantage of all this talent that they have. They might have found their guy, so much so that they tried to invest in really assuring that position and drafting another quarterback just in case Kirk Cousins didn't work out. But they've definitely improved at that position, bringing in not just on the player side, but overall the personnel side with a new head coach in Raheem Morris, a new offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson. Really excited about him, probably more than anybody of their new additions. I'll touch on that in a second. Then Kirk Cousins, obviously, Michael Penix, all to go along with their exciting playmakers like Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. They brought in Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore. There's talent all over the place for this Falcons, at least on offense. We're going to focus in on just the offense here. So this year with Kirk Cousins, it seems to be finally the year where this offense can finally burst onto the scenes. And back on Zach Robinson, because the quarterback is great. You're obviously going to improve there from last year. having Desmond Ridder there. It's an obvious improvement this year. So where I think it could really make this offense stand out is Zach Robinson coming over from the Los Angeles Rams as their passing game coordinator / QB coach is a dream scenario. He was highly sought out after this offseason by various teams along with the Falcons. I know the Steelers were involved, and I'm sure others were as well. Because you just look at the passing game from the Los Angeles Rams and how successful he was with Matthew Stafford as well. In 2022, with Stafford as the passing game coordinator, he was able to help Stafford reach the highest completion percentage of his entire career. And it says a lot because Matthew Stafford, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the NFL, during his time with Detroit, did a lot there. And I think people really just found out about him with the Rams. But with how good he was in the past, Zach Robinson really helped him reach that next level and have a 68% completion percentage in 2022. Then also, he jumped up his passing yards numbers a little bit from 2022 to 2023. In 2022, he had 3,108 yards, and then in 2023, he was among some of the top leaders in passing yards with 4,063 yards. Good numbers, encouraging numbers if you're bringing in Zach Robinson, especially when you have a lot more options, I think, with the Falcons than you did with the Rams, but you could make a similar argument and say that the Rams have better quality in Puka and in Cooper Kupp, just based on skill. I think most people would take those two guys over the Falcons players, but the Falcons have a lot more to offer with London, Pitts, Rondale Moore, Darnell Mooney, Bijan Robinson, even Tyler Algier. There's more weapons to go around, so I think that'll do the Atlanta Falcons a lot more. It'll benefit them a lot more this year with Zach Robinson having all these options to really experiment with and have success with overall in Atlanta. That's what we're looking for here with the Falcons. And Drake London spoke about it recently. What are the differences that are being brought with Zach Robinson and also with Raheem Morris? He touched on something that I really wasn't expecting, but it also makes the most amount of sense at the end of the day. Drake London mentioned what are those changes, what is really being brought into with Zach Robinson in this offense, and he said it's just the type of play style we're trying to play. It's really, really fast. You got to be in condition. I think that speed is a killer in this game. If you have it, you can win a lot of things. And off of that point, I really didn't notice how differently made up this team is. With his point on speed really being an emphasis this year and just being in good condition, if you're a receiver, if you're just any of these skill position players, how big of a point that is this year. I didn't really notice it with Arthur Smith and the Falcons offense. It was a lot more bigger bodies out there, just bigger personnel out there with more offensive linemen out there, more tight ends, more 12 personnel sort of thing. And there was just a bigger set out there in terms of running the ball and passing the ball. It all looked similar in how many people were out there. It wasn't so spread out. It was very congested, and then you get the play action off of that. And you were successful in the running game, which is a plus, like the Falcons were, and why Bijan was so successful. But you didn't really target those pass catchers as much. And again, a lot has to do with the quarterback, so that's obviously going to change. But overall, I didn't really notice that. Now that they're bringing in this more spread offense, more modern offense, you can say, they're a lot more lighter, a lot more lean, as the reports were saying around this subject, with Drake London there being as silky smooth as he is, being fast just in general. You bring in Rondale Moore instead of a guy like Van Jefferson. Rondale Moore, a lot more speed, a lot more quick twitch than Van Jefferson, who's I think at least 6'3", just a bigger frame out there. You bring in more speed with Rondale Moore, Darnell Mooney as well, in comparison to Matt Collins, just another big-bodied receiver who could go out there, block for you, and catch the ball at the point of contention. But now it's getting a lot quicker, a lot more faster, and they're just running out there. The fact about being in condition for Drake London and this offense, I think, says a lot on what we can look towards a little bit in here, and whether or not the Falcons can be a top 5 offense this season, because it seems the way everybody talks about them, it seems like they could be. And I think they have the potential to be up there among the best, because their weapons are truly talented. And just going off of just talent alone, they are definitely one of the most talented in the NFC. But now that it is a lot more lighter and it is a lot more faster, Zach Robinson and how he could use this team a lot in a lot more creative ways should be exciting to see. If you're spread out more, you can move pieces around more motion, more just confusing and deceiving the opposing defense at the same time, which is something great to look forward to and get excited about. And also, just the way that Raheem Morris, their head coach, really the main point of everything and how they set up, and how he's already talking about getting Bijan Robinson the ball a lot more. That's what he said, and Bijan, chipped off of that or went off of that point and said that he expects it almost to be like a Christian McCaffrey sort of role. So if you can get anywhere close to the level of production of Christian McCaffrey, every Falcons fan should be excited. Then you also have Raheem Morris talking about Kyle Pitts and how they know what they could get out of him if they get him going. So just another point to get excited about. Raheem Morris looking forward to getting Kyle Pitts the ball more, it seems like. And also you have Drake London not only mentioning this quote that you see, but also talking about how he wants to stand out more in this offense, that he now feels more free to use his skill set more. It fits this offense a lot more. So all those things just wrapped into one. Can this team finally be a top 5 offense in the league? I believe that they might have to be. And what I mean by that is that I think they have to be at least a top 10 offense to sort of mask their defensive deficiencies, if that makes sense. I don't want to be a pessimist about the Falcons if I'm talking them up. I really do believe they have the talent to do it, but those defensive flaws, those holes a little bit, and especially the pass rush, their linebacking level, and the secondary is in good hands with Jesse Bates and A.J. Terrell. But getting the pressure and having those guys cover for a lot longer, that's what really worries me. So I feel like they have to be a top 10, top 7 offense at the highest, at least I should say, at the minimum, to sort of mask those deficiencies a little bit, because in a shootout, I think I would take them over a good amount of teams, at least in the NFC, definitely over maybe all the teams in their division for sure. If it was going to be a shootout, I would probably go with the Falcons. Then you look elsewhere. With the Rams, it would be a good style of fight. I would probably still take them. The 49ers is a little bit different. They're stacked, but against all other teams, the Seahawks, the Cardinals, in the NFC North, probably over all those teams as well, because I just feel like they're not there yet. The Falcons have been chomping at the bit for a while now, and they just needed a quarterback. And it doesn't hurt also that you bring in Zach Robinson and Raheem Morris that really want to get those guys involved. So I think they're going to have to be that sort of offense, and I have confidence that they can be if it all goes according to plan, if they could figure out what works best for them, including the run on top of complementing it with the pass game and Drake London and Kyle Pitts, because they're way too talented to put up the numbers that they've been putting up. If they get everything right, this offense could seriously be scary, and all their games are going to be super exciting if they get everything right and everything falls into place. But the change of personnel, I think, really helps amplify that. If you look at Arthur Smith here, and this is the last thing I'll say about this segment, Arthur Smith and his philosophy that he brought to the Falcons, you see it now with Pittsburgh and how really Drake London is almost right in this sense. Now in Pittsburgh, you see it turn into a lot more heavy sets, more emphasis on the offensive line, more emphasis on the running backs, the tight ends as well. They're looking a lot bigger, also bringing in some bigger players in some tight ends that Arthur Smith brought over from Atlanta. You can really see that point being confirmed there with what Drake London is saying, with how the Steelers have changed a little bit and how their team is made up. They're looking a lot bigger, a lot less finesse than power this year. So that is where the Falcons stand right now. They should take advantage of it because they're all super young. I think the average age of them is 25, 24 years old. So they've just been waiting at this opportunity, and the Falcons are super smart, super intelligent way of using that youth because they have a lot more energy, obviously. They're ready to go a lot more often, using that to your advantage, not so much as a disadvantage with a lack of experience, but using the physical traits to go out there, run defenses into the ground just because they're just younger and they're fresher, it seems like. That's another great way that Zach Robinson, this team, Raheem Morris, is taking that to a next level, and I really like it. I'm really looking forward to seeing them in 2024. if everything falls right, they could be vying for one of those playoff spots and making a return to the playoffs in a long time. So that's where we stand on the Falcons. Top 5, slight potential. I'm expecting more top 10. Top 10 is where I'll have the Falcons in 2024. But that is it for that segment. And when we return after our next break, we're going to get into some more of the AFC side of the ball. Talking about Matthew Judon, and is his time with the New England Patriots almost up? Based on what he has posted on social media, that seems to be the belief just from what I'm reading into it, so we're going to talk about that. And also some more uncertainty around Marlon Humphrey and his future with the Baltimore Ravens. What does that look like? Has he made enough of a case for himself to continue on with the Ravens, or is this year the final year we're going to see him in a Ravens uniform? We're going to answer all those questions when we return, so don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here now on the show to jump into the New England Patriots. What is going on with them in this offseason? Focusing in on Matthew Judon at this point, one of their most important pieces, I dare to say, in the last few years, and definitely contributing a lot with being that star pass rusher that the Patriots needed, that has done a lot of good for them in his time in New England. But it was a little bit of a surprise to me to see others that were fundamental pieces to this team, like a Christian Barmore, Ramondre Stevenson, a Jelani Tavai, all get contract extensions. And then once we get to Matthew Judon, I think a lot of fans, a lot of people around the Patriots were just waiting for this to get done. But up until this point, nothing has really moved with this team. And that has me a little bit puzzled, as I'm sure it does with other fans and just other people around the Patriots. So far, Matthew Judon is entering the last year of his contract off of that current deal that he's on, a 4-year, $56 million deal. And there has been no talks, no movement around this. New England hasn't agreed to an extension up until this point. And it almost, to me, just knowing these facts, seeing how they've re-signed all the other important pieces to their team, like I just mentioned, it almost seems like the answer is right there in front of us. Just a lot of people don't want to acknowledge it. At least up until this point, because they re-signed all these important players. And also on the top of that, it pretty much just shows where this is going. Like I mentioned, they've signed all these players, and at the same time, they have a lot of cap space left over. So what is really the problem here, other than the fact that the Patriots are probably not going to re-sign Matthew Judon up until this point? It's a harsh reality, I'm sure, to a lot of Patriots fans, but I don't know what else you can make of this situation other than, I don't even know. I don't even know what else could be holding it up. Unless they truly can't figure out a price to extend Matthew Judon. He is 31 years old, going on to 32. So you can see why there's a little bit of a hesitancy there from the Patriots, and also off of the fact he's coming off of a severe injury, tearing his bicep in 2023. Only playing 4 games, so it doesn't bode well too much for Matthew Judon up until this point, just based on all the facts that we have in front of us. Most of us could really paint out the picture that this is going to be the last year, most likely, for Matthew Judon in the Patriots uniform. And not only that, based on the context clues that we're getting, but also, if you guys saw on social media this past Wednesday, an interaction between a fan of the New England Patriots and Matthew Judon responding to what they said. Initially, in the post by the fan, they said, "Pay the man what he wants," really wanting Matthew Judon to stay. But under it, in a response on X, Matthew Judon actually responded to that and said, "I don't think that's going to happen." So that's one thing, very straightforward. Matthew Judon not feeling great about the situation. And also, just a few hours later, I love this. he posted the SpongeBob meme, or the SpongeBob GIF. Is it GIF or GIF? I say GIF. If you guys say GIF, you're wrong. The SpongeBob GIF on X, where I'm sure you guys have seen it. It's the one where he's just like sitting up like this, and it's just, I'm a head out. You know, if you've seen that one, I love that one. He posted that hours later. Just more fuel to the fire that he is going to be moving on. Referencing that GIF, saying he's gonna head out. He's out of there, out of New England, it seems. So that's where it stands right now with Matthew Judon. He will be 32, like I mentioned. All the facts and all the information we've seen up until this point inclines to that. Now, is it the right choice? Is it the right choice to move on from Matthew Judon up until this point? I would say yes, just because I am a fan of not really circling around the idea of, oh, this quarterback eventually is going to do it for us. Matthew Judon deserves it. Let's invest money in him and see what happens. 32, off of a severe injury. You should move on from him, but the sentimental feeling is there. For what he has done for New England, I can see why it's hard to do it, but I am a fan of just making the tough decisions, getting over it, and starting with something fresh. I don't like to really dance around something too much, so I think this is a good move. I think it is the right choice for the Patriots because you're already cleaning house. You're already bringing in a new head coach in Gerard Mayo, and with that being said, I'm sure he had the list of players that they needed to deal with in terms of contracts, and the fact that he went to everybody and knew that Matthew Judon needed an extension, starting a new era, I think that making the decision in it of itself, I think says a lot. If you really wanted Matthew Judon to be part of this new chapter, I think this deal probably would have been done already, just based off of the fact that they have a lot of salary cap space, so that's really not the issue here. They just might not feel that what he's asking for is something they can do that benefits their future, because I think this team is in a spot right now where this season might not be the most anticipated, might not be the most hyped up, where you're looking forward to seeing how far the Patriots go. It's going to be about figuring out everything, what you have in front of you with the players, what players you really want to invest in, what players you want to maybe improve upon next year, because I think next offseason it's going to be a big one for the Patriots. They have a lot of cap space right now, but unless they try and trade for Brandon Ayuk or trade for T. Higgins or something like that and use a lot of that space on them, I think next offseason they're going to be a major player in, like I said, evaluating what you have this year and then seeing what you really need and maybe spending big on a pass rusher. If Matthew Judon leaves, they're definitely going to need another one. So based on who's available, they could have their choice of some of the top elite available free agents out on the market if they just go by this season, wait until next offseason, dip their toe really into the pool and just take their choice of who they want to add to this team, not really being limited by any salary cap issues that they have going on. And also on the fact that Matthew Judon, I think if they can't agree on anything that they think is appropriate, he's probably, I would guess, is asking for around maybe $18 to $16 million per year as a salary. And right now I think he's making between 11 and 14. So there's a lot of pass rushers ahead of him in terms of just making more money. And is it accurate based on who's getting paid more and if they're that much better than Judon? Definitely not. He definitely has earned himself a little bit higher in the pecking order, but just the Patriots don't feel inclined to do that. There's a lot more uncertainty, I think, that comes with Judon for this team rather than security that you feel, because the timelines, again, don't really add up. If you're going to extend them to 2 years, 3 years, and not getting the absolute best out of him in comparison to what you have been getting, I don't think it's worth it. I think it's just, again, they're not going to be that great anyway. I'm not a fan of keeping a great player in a team that's rebuilding, like a Cortland Sutton or something like that, in those situations where the team and how good that player is right now, he's looking for immediate benefits right now to make the most out of his career for however long it goes. He's definitely closer to the end than the prime, than the start of it. Their timelines don't add up, so I just think it's best for both parties to just split ways and get a move on, because Judon could maybe sign a year or two on a more contending team like the Bucks, jump off right away. Maybe the Jets, if they don't decide to stay with Hassan Reddick, they could try and trade for Judon or something like that, or sign him next offseason for a year or two for that short window that they have with Aaron Rodgers. With the Patriots, they're starting something new. I think it's better to get fresh faces in there that are more in line with where they're going and their path at this point in time. So it's a tough one because Judon has been very productive for this team, has played in a lot of big games for them, has made a lot of big plays for them. But right now, where they stand, I think it's better for the Patriots to move on. And I think it's also better for Judon to move on and find more success quicker than with the Patriots, that it's clearly going to take a lot longer to do so. So that's where I stand on it. That's where we're going to leave the subject for today's show. And we have one more thing to touch on today's episode. We're going to talk about more uncertainty with the Baltimore Ravens this time, and with one of their most tenured players in Marlon Humphrey. Is he worth sticking around based on his production, based on his health? Could this be the last year for Humphrey in a Baltimore Ravens uniform? We're going to touch on it and why it could be, at the end of the day, his last year with the Ravens. So one more break to get through, and when we return, we're going to talk about more on the Ravens and on Marlon Humphrey. Thank you for joining me on this last segment on today's show, talking about the Baltimore Ravens and one of the leaders, one of the more veteran players, it's crazy to say because of all the changes that they've gone through up until now, in Marlon Humphrey. What is his future looking like with Baltimore? Because it was brought up through the articles that I was reading on how this could be a make it or break it year for Marlon Humphrey. Again, it sounds crazy because he has been a big piece for them and their defense, but with Marlon Humphrey, a little bit of a background check on him. Drafted in 2017 to the Ravens and had early success right off the bat in his first year. Through his third year was when he was named to the All-Pro team. So heading into his fourth year, he was coming off of that All-Pro season. And during his rookie year, heading into that fourth year of that rookie deal, Baltimore decided to extend him to a massive 5-year, $97.5 million extension. Before that, last year of his rookie deal. So they've seen enough. They saw how good he was at the start, how consistent he was, so they gave him that massive extension. And now Humphrey is only 27 years old, and I feel like he's been playing for forever, honestly. But he's, since that point, has been dealing with some more nagging injuries since then. If you look at 2021, he only played 12 games. Then he was fully healthy in 2022, but then this past year he missed 7 games. And to go along with that, the production really hasn't been there up until this point. Based on that production, Humphrey has only recorded 1 interception in the last 3, in only 3 of the last 4 years, He's only recorded 1 interception and 12 pass deflections since 2022. He has 3 years left on his deal, but no guaranteed money after that. So after this year, no guaranteed money left on that deal. So the Ravens have a little bit more of an advantage there in terms of what they want to do with him, what decision that they want to come up with after this year based on how he plays and how the production is and how healthy he is, really, because The Athletic wrote in one of their articles how Humphrey, how his cap hit this year, or actually, in 2025, is going to be 25.13. That's in 2025, and then in the following year, it's going to be 22.93 in 2026. So They believe that Humphrey also probably needs to have a healthy and a very convincing season this year to avoid next year the Ravens having really the power to decide if it's worth keeping him on, knowing that those cap hits are coming in the following year. He still has a great opportunity because not only is he getting at least another year, but at the same time the Ravens are a good team, so it's not like you're trying your best to produce out there with a team that's not so much of a dominant force. Their defense is very good, probably in the top 5 conversation. So he's going to have a great opportunity with a great pass rush to have these chances to record some more interceptions, have a low completion percentage against them. He has one more chance, it seems like, to do so before we head into 2025, and there's a lot more questions than answers around Marlon Humphrey. And also the health factor is huge. Playing as many games as he can this year is going to go a long way in convincing the team and the fans that he at least is out there. He is better serving them, obviously, with him on the field than hurt. So he has one more year to prove it. But the questions are starting to pop up right now is the focus of this segment. And also you could look at the fact that the Ravens drafted one of the best corners, in my opinion, in this year's draft in Nate Wiggins towards the end of the first draft, an absolute steal. Bringing him in could be looked at as a reinforcement for the Ravens, but also in case, if Marlon Humphrey doesn't convince anybody, you have Nate Wiggins there to not have as much pressure on him this year. And if you decide to move on from Humphrey, you have Nate Wiggins there to slide in there and be more prepared in a way to step into the limelight in his second year if they decide to move on from Marlon Humphrey. So that's something to keep an eye on, the guaranteed money and how that plays into the decision that the Ravens make, and also if there is talks about maybe renegotiating, restructuring that contract if Marlon Humphrey feels that he has played well enough to approach the Ravens in that sort of capacity. And also to keep in mind an important date with Marlon Humphrey and how this could all play out and how we could receive any sort of clues or be swayed some way if as to what could happen. In March of 2025, Humphrey's deal includes a $4 million roster bonus in March of 2025. So a decision most likely will come by then, because if they're not convinced by Marlon Humphrey, they're not going to wait until after March to cut him or release him and give him that $4 million roster bonus. A decision will most likely come by then. And then at that point, if it comes that early in the process of the offseason, it could be a post-June 1st designated release by the Ravens, like we've seen a lot this year. By doing so, the Ravens would actually save $18 million in cap space by designating Humphrey as a post-June 1st release. So another thing that could benefit the Ravens, not to say that they should do it, but it is something that's enticing because of the fact of where Marlon Humphrey is right now. He has been there for a long time, so it is hard to part with someone that has contributed so much to this organization. But again, seeing how much it benefits the salary, seeing how much you're really getting out of Marlon Humphrey for paying him $19.5 million in salary just based on the general structure of the deal. He has no more guaranteed money after that, so that benefits the Ravens a little bit more. But it is something that they have to keep an eye on. And Humphrey has been one of the most, I think, one of the players that advertises the Ravens the most. He has a podcast, so he always talks about it on there and how solid the Ravens are. And he's one of the most prominent faces that once you think of the Ravens defense, you think of Marlon Humphrey right away, Roquan Smith right away. Those guys that have been there for a long time, and there's no way anyone's touching Roquan Smith ever. He's probably going to retire there as a Raven, but Marlon Humphrey has been there for a long time now, and to see the questions pop up, it would certainly be weird to not see him out there, being a Steelers fan and seeing him out there all the time in those games against the Ravens. It would surprise me if they decide to move on from him. What do I make of his future right now? It's a little weird just because I do acknowledge the times that he isn't out there and how recently he has missed a lot of games. So that would be my biggest concern if I were a Ravens fan, is how healthy he could be going forward, because I think just based on ability and where he is at, only 27 years old, I don't think he's done, bad enough to convince you that he's not still a good player. To me, it's those injury concerns that keep popping up, and that's not something that the Ravens really need to deal with right now because they are in their Super Bowl window. They are in the point in time where Lamar Jackson, MVP conversation year in and year out. They just brought in Derrick Henry. Mark Andrews is healthy now. Isaiah Likely, you saw what he could do last year and how excited you can get from him. Zay Flowers as well. You have this point in time now where everything is falling into pieces and you don't need health injuries to sort of get you there, but then you just fall short because your best players aren't out there. That's my biggest concern. I don't know what they're going to do. Again, it just falls to whether he's healthy enough to be out there for a consistent amount of games. That's my biggest deciding point in all of this. So whether what happens or not, I won't be surprised. Or actually, I will be more surprised if they do move on from him. But I could see it either side, whether they decide to do that or not. But right now, it stands in a weird spot. More questions starting to be brought up. He could answer all of those with a solid 2024 season. But with that being the case, that'll wrap up today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys for tuning into the show and remind you to please like, follow, and subscribe to the show as well. On top of following the network on all forms of social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, and on TikTok. To find out more about this show and check out more of the content, check out the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel on YouTube for a variety of different forms of NFL discussions and content that are both posted on those channels. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for live episodes of the show, talking more about the NFL and discussing more hot topics in and around the league with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you guys all have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys back here with me again live on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to